Oh, I'm Katherine Duncan. I'm with CBC Radio. The show that you might know about locally is called The Key of A, and it's about original music by Alberta musicians, and it's on Saturdays at 5 on CBC Radio 1 across Alberta. Also do classical shows, and I'm also the foreperson of the Polaris Music Prize jury. So it's pretty cool. So on my right, Marta Ligocki. And Marta, would you like to intro yourself and what do you do? And we'll just go across.
Thanks, Catherine. So my name is Marta. I'm the program director at CJSW 90.9 FM here in Calgary. We're Calgary's only campus and community radio station. I've been program director since 2016, and I've also been hosting Maple Syrup, which is a Canadian music show on CJSW, Wednesdays 2 to 4. So after this, I'm going to run away and do that. I'm also on the board of FemWave, which is a feminist arts and music festival, and I'm also on the board of the Beltline Neighborhoods Association, which runs a local music venue called the McHugh House. So it's going to be in a nutshell.
I'm Matt Barry, music director of X99. I'm also the host of the show Exposure, which is a Canada-wide indie artist showcase program. It goes on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Where we try to focus on a lot of local acts, but also Canadian indie or some of the bands that I guess aren't showcased as much on regular radio rotation.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm the events and operations coordinator for Corus Radio. We have Country 105, Q107, 770 CHQR, and Global TV in the market. I work with a lot of the festivals in town, and I sit on the board for Music Calgary.
Shall I do two mics?
Yeah, do it.
My name is Hayley Muir. I am currently an announcer-producer at the CKUA radio network in our Calgary studio. CKUA is Alberta's public broadcaster. So there I host the weekday 4 to 6 p.m. slot and do some sort of behind-the-scenes arts and culture guide production work as well. I'm also one of the co-founders of FemWave, the Calgary's Feminist Arts Festival, and I'm in a local band, so yeah.
Cool. Well, you have the mic. I'm going to start the questions with you this time. So how do you interact with musicians in your work?
Yeah, I mean, it varies from day to day. I get a lot of emails about musicians who are playing gigs around Alberta and releasing records that they'd like me to hear. So a lot of it is that. Of course, I meet a lot of musicians out in the real world too, at various shows and festivals and such around town. Yeah, so there's a lot of face-to-face here in Calgary, but especially at CKUA because it's Alberta-wide. I discourse with them a lot over email, and yeah. Does that answer that question?
I think so. Well, Melissa, why don't you take a run at that one?
My interaction with local bands is a lot through Music Calgary, but at my work it's with the festivals that when they're booking local talent for Country Thunder or our own Canadian Content Development Initiative. Most radio stations, commercial radio stations, have Canadian content money that they put back into local programs, so that's where I come in at Corus.
My interaction varies on, I guess, 2 points. With Exposure, it's a lot of, a lot of bands. Like it's usually like email, Facebook, or like a lot of face-to-face. I'm friends with a lot of the people in bands out in the city. A lot of local artists. I see them out at local shows, and we kind of interact through usually them having a gig or having new albums or songs out, and they'll usually send those towards me, and then I can play them on the show. Assuming it kind of fits within like the alternative realm of music, and then on the music director side, a lot of the times I deal with bands. It's usually through a lot of like labels or through like radio trackers or reps, things like that, that usually speak on behalf of the bands if they're signed or being like they paid for a radio tracker or anything like that. And then when they come to town, I usually will make sure like I'm there when they perform live or try to check out the local shows as well.
So CJSW works a little bit differently than my friends here. We're a small staff of 7, and within that, I'm managing 120 on-air hosts, and they're all volunteers too. And so with bands, what I'm doing is I'm arranging interviews, we arrange live sessions, and so what's cool about CJSW and kind of campus and community radio in general is that it can be a really accessible access point for musicians who are starting out, and specifically we have a huge mandate for supporting local musicians. And so if there is a touring band or a band releasing an album, then we'll make sure that they get on air. We have a totally equipped live session studio, and so we put that out on air, record it, and then send them off with the recording. And then every year we put out a compilation CD, three CDs kind of highlighting the best of our live sessions. And so, yeah, in kind of a myriad ways. So myself directly, I arrange interviews most primarily, but then we have a complete music department who's handling submissions, kind of coaching, kind of giving moral and logistical support as well.
Yeah, and on CBC and CKUA, we do sometimes still go out and record live bands. We don't have the kind of budget that we used to have in the great old days when we had recording engineers and studios and we went everywhere and recorded things. Now we try and team up with people who are recording, like the National Music Centre, for example, and try to get recordings of events that are happening so that we can play them on the CKUA. But in terms of what I do with artists, it's more, come into the studio. If you've got a good story, if something exciting has just happened in your career, if you're just releasing a new album and you've worked with a fantastic producer and you want to talk about it, it's generally, it's not just about what inspires your music and what were you thinking about when you wrote this song, but more if there's kind of a news element or a kind of a story element. That's when I'll try to get an artist to come into studio and do an actual sit down and chat. Mostly it's really just trying to share the music that's coming out of this community, and by this community I mean the whole province. So that's my answer to that. So next question that I have for all of you is what are you looking for when you're choosing music to play on your show? And I'm curious, things like, or on your station, things like, how heavily formatted are you? What, is a 3.5 minute song the only length you'll consider? That kind of thing. So just speak to what you're looking for. And why don't we let Matt go first this time?
So this is, once again, it's twofold. So I'll start with, I guess, like with exposure. So with exposure, really the mandate that we usually cover is that, like, the songs are fitting within, like, I kind of refer to it as like the alternative umbrella. So it's like we'll kind of lean more into like alternative pop or some of like the like I don't know, like a alternative electronic, where it's like can kind of fit within those kind of realms. And then the same vein, some of the stuff that's a little bit like folkier, a little bit softer than we may play on regular rotation. And the really only mandate is that it kind of fits within that. Like, we don't really play a lot of like like heavy metal or anything with like a lot of like screaming. So it's still relatively radio friendly. But it's still, as long as it's CanCon, and we try to have a focus on local for the weekly show as well. As far as the, like being music director with X, like there's no specific mandate, but that's a little bit tighter than what exposure would be. So it's a lot of stuff that is, sometimes like you said, like a 3.5 minute thing. That's not necessarily a mandate that a song has to be within 3.5 minutes, but ideally if a song is quicker, the better. The faster a song gets, into a hook or anything like that, is usually really good. Mainly just because you have to grip the listeners as soon as possible with anything that's new. And we kind of look for a lot of things that, a lot of things that I guess like, kind of like an idea that's like familiar, but sometimes like a little bit different as well. Like, one of the things we try and find is something that is, I like try and find something that's cool, but it's still kind of, not too far out there that your average radio listener is kind of thrown off by the sound of it. And that's because you're still trying to appeal to a mass audience. And although there's a lot of people that are still alternative fans, it's like you'll notice when you listen to the radio station that you will hear a lot of bands that still have like a similar vibe for that era. Like right now we have a lot of like, it's like our Arkells are very popular, Dear Rouge, bands like the Zolas and things like that. But then you have some of the new up and coming Canadian artists that kind of, I would think of are a little more like kind of groundbreaking in that sense. It'd be like Grandson is one of those artists that really seem to be like tapped into that whole Gen Z vibe. And so, that's what we kind of look for.
Melissa, why don't you?
A lot of with the Canadian content development stuff that we do with Corus, it's not so much about we're looking for what would sound good on air, because we're looking for support that these programs would support. We give money to Factor, we give money to Alberta Music. So these organizations are then going through your grant applications and looking for kind of like a full picture marketing process. So it's a lot of that. It's that big picture, where is your career at now? So festivals like Country Thunder, they want to get butts in the seats, as you say. So we throw around the word a lot when we're applying for Factor things with Music Calgary, these export-ready bands. So it's that full career. It's, are you pushing yourself in other markets? Are you playing shows? Because while, you know, someone like JJ Shiplet is touring, if he has a show in Calgary, that's something we can promote to our listeners. If we decide to play his new single. But if he's playing, you know, strictly Vancouver or Winnipeg, it's going to get lost on commercial radio listeners. So it's that full package. It's if you're not signed to a label, which most bands in Calgary don't have that luxury yet, it's what are you doing yourself to make your career well-rounded. So hiring a radio tracker, like Matt said, are you looking for distro in other markets? Are you contacting commercial campus stations when you're on tour? So radio play, while we're in commercial radio, are looking usually at other commercial radio stations. When there's play on campus community, it creates that blip. So the more you get played and the more SOCAN monitors campus community radio stations, we can see those radio plays and it'll gain our attention.
Hayley.
Yeah, my various show musical focuses have shifted quite a bit throughout my broadcasting career, and where I'm at now is super broad. I'll listen to anything, and I'm always a fan of the underdog and giving a platform and a voice to folks who might not have super big access to it otherwise, sort of that middle ground, right? The sort of middleman between releasing the record and potentially getting some more sort of commercial side radio play. But really, like when I'm listening to music, obviously there's some production levels that are going to come into play, although we know that can be difficult and expensive for musicians. So there's a little bit of that, and really I'm just listening for authenticity and soulful things and things that have a groove and maybe are a little unexpected. And especially the way I sort of program my own show, I like to package things so that people are going to hear something kind of familiar and comfortable, and then something maybe a little less familiar and comfortable, you know, sandwiching like the world's fastest 71-year-old Ukrainian piano player in between Feist and something like Paul Simon or whatever. So creating those sort of access points, not only for the artists to have access to platforms and to exposure, but to provide listeners access and maybe a different way of listening to music. And I also listen and program from a very sort of intersectional feminist lens. So I keep in mind racial and gender parity. And I don't go 3 songs on the radio without playing a female voice. And I always love it when I'm planning a show. I'm like, oh, I guess I have to put a dude in here now because there's just been too many girls. So those are kind of my big focal points for sure.
Oh, Mark, are we just going to use this one? Great. So twofold, when it comes to music submissions for CJSW, we're really accessible. Again, kind of in the, like, if you were to put us on a continuum, I think CJSW is the most accepting when it comes to music submissions. A question, just to make sure I'm talking to the right audience. Is everyone here a local musician, like from Calgary? Good. Okay, awesome. Well done. I'm glad you're here. So that's that. We don't accept singles. That's the only restriction. So it has to be at least a 4-song EP. LP. There we go. So that's it. And then as long as you have that, we're pivoting a little bit more towards digital submissions rather than physical. So that's kind of nice for you because that can save you postage, etc. And kind of touching a little bit on what Hayley said, some production quality is solid, but again, we're very accepting. And then for my show in particular, when I started in 2013 with my show, it was was pretty broad. I would say it was like kind of, and no shade, Catherine, but like CBC light. So like the like gentle singer-songwriters who wouldn't have necessarily gotten on CBC, whatever. But now, kind of doing it for almost 6 years, it's pivoted a lot more towards the experimental, ambient, electronic kind of side of Canadian music, which I really like. And so when you're talking about making sure that music is accessible, we got to challenge the audience sometimes. But it's like Hayley says, making that sandwich of, accessible artists versus, challenging CJSW listeners a little bit more. And our listeners have more of a palate and an appetite for that. So I can understand what Matt's saying. So as long as you have 4 songs, send it over to us. And if you're a local band, again, there's a really good chance that you'll end up on our chart list. And then, so the chart list is the resource that CJSW hosts have for new music. So that's within the last 4 months. And then since we are a programmer-driven radio station, it's all up to the programmers what they're going to choose. So that's kind of how that works here.
So you're like the first level of filter, and then you make the list, and then they can choose from that general list. Okay, cool. And curious about, swears. Like where do you guys fall on that? Because on CBC, there are lots of hip-hop songs especially that I can't play because they are just riddled with words that would be considered offensive to lots of people. So I feel badly, But where do all you guys fit on that continuum?
We're pretty accepting. We're cognizant of the time. We're very, very cognizant of the time. So like morning and drive, we'll stay away from that. And if there is a song with, and it can't be gratuitous, like if the chorus has a lot of dirty language, and that might be a little bit more challenging. But if there's a swear, then the programmer will give a disclaimer either themselves or we have some pre-produced stingers. Again, it's about challenging the audience.
For the day-to-day stuff, it's usually pretty clean. Even if most of the stuff that's submitted as singles to us aren't really riddled with swears, or if they are, we have an edit for that. And then with exposure, I'm usually asked that the bands are edited because our main thing is like swear words after, or I guess before 10 o'clock, which exposure runs at 9 p.m. So there's like some things, it's like you'll allow the word like, can I swear? It's like, we have like Nathaniel Rateliff's like son of a bitch, or like we'll let the word like goddamn in there, but it's like same deal, as long as it's not excessive in that amount. And then with after 10 o'clock, we'll run, Killing the Name Of from Rage Against the Machine unedited, which is awesome. But everything else is usually pretty tight knit and clean.
Yeah. There are usually regulations in place for commercial stations on when you can air swears, if at all. So it really depends on the format. Matt has a lot of freedom in that sense, being in the alternative format, and most rock stations do across the country. But something like Top 40 usually will have a radio edit or request that of the artist or the label if it wasn't sent to them that way. But yeah, when you're running into something that has swears kind of throughout the main part of the song, I'll hear a lot of songs where they'll just replace the word. So you'll hear it on something like XM, and you're like, this wasn't the version I heard when they submitted it to me. But they'll just replace, like fudge instead of the other one.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, from a musician's perspective, the first record our band put out, I think we did a couple of, like, clean edits of things where we were like, I'd skip over the word buck or whatever. And then the second record that we did, we were like, screw it. It's like, I don't care. I don't want to do radio edits. And if a station wants to play the record but doesn't want to play those words, then they can just find another track. But from a programmer's point of view, it's really contextual and keeping in mind time of day and who's listening and what they're saying in the song. I steer clear of the F word, but if there's a song I really want to play, I'll just do a quick little clean edit myself and throw it into our system. But like the other day, I played Lizzo Good As Hell, and I was like, she's just using shit 3 times, mostly as punctuation in the first verse. So yeah, I sort of do like a scan for lyrics, and there's a sliding scale of appropriateness, I think. Every once in a while I'll miss an F-bomb, and someone will send me an email and I will apologize. But yeah, for the most part, I think it's contextual, and yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the Key of A, my show is 5 p.m. on Saturday, and it's lots of families. And I actually, with hip hop in particular, I thought, well, if it's a black artist using the N-word, is that okay? And so I actually asked for permission, and they said no, because we're a public broadcaster, and if we're trying to support Canadian culture and equality and anti-racism, and that would just really offend a lot of people. So it's like, okay, fine, other people can do that. That's fine.
Can I comment on that?
Of course.
Sorry, it's just like a funny little anecdote. I remember once it was at CJSW, and this is like the context thing. I was hosting a morning show, and I played a Curtis Mayfield track, and I think it was Pusher Man. So there's a couple of N's in there, and we got in trouble, and or we got an email from a listener about they were upset about that, and I'm a very sensitive person, so I was upset that they were upset. But then we had some really good conversations with the station manager and the program director at the time, and it's like, it's Curtis Mayfield. Get over it. And yeah, we had some good discussions, and obviously to keep that in mind in the future, but it's a funny little line with that.
It is.
Especially, yeah.
It is, yeah, for sure. So it's obviously, I mean, so, the easy answer for you if you are submitting a song to any radio is just offer a clean version. You can send the original version, and that's what you publish under your own name, and, offer that too, obviously. But then if you can make a clean version, you're just going to save us a lot of stress, right? And potentially save our audiences, unnecessary bad feelings. So anyway, that's a good thing to have talked about. So what's the best way for musicians to reach out to all of you? What do you prefer? I know for Key of A, because we don't have a physical music library in Calgary anymore at CBC, digital versions are way more useful to us, and as you mentioned, they save you time and money as well. But how do you guys all feel about that? What's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, like I said, we are moving more towards digital, and that's just because we're physically running out of space in our library. So logistically, we're making that pivot. Otherwise, so we're in a bit of transition. Our music director moved on, so we're waiting for an incoming person to come in. And so submissions are kind of handled by myself and a team of volunteers right now. But that's only for the next 3 weeks. But in general, it would be the music director that handles that. And so they handle not only music submissions, but also arranging live sessions. If you're any sort of band, but especially, again, we prioritize local bands. And the other part, two other things that I'll mention with CJSW is, we really like to position ourselves as a resource for local bands. And so music directors in the past, and I'm confident that our incoming one is always happy to kind of lend advice or support or any advice if you're going on tour and just need a friend to talk to, then the music director can be a really good resource for that. And there are other music directors in the country who will do that as well. I think of Sean down at CKUA in Lethbridge. That's his favorite thing, is just to give advice and be there. The other service that we provide for local bands is our monthly mail out. So every other month we you send us a stack of your CDs and a little bit of money just to cover the postage, and we'll send that off to all the other campus radio stations in the country. And so that's kind of nice because that takes all of the legwork off of you in terms of mailing out. And then the other nice thing about that is, it takes a little while for the mail to do its thing, and then, for the music directors to listen and accept your music. But you can kind of time it out and then see where you're charting at other campus stations. And then if you even make the national chart, which is called Earshot. So that's kind of nice for you to time it out that way in really specific ways. And then you can kind of coincide that with a tour, et cetera, et cetera. So email if you just want to get in touch with us. But again, those other services are available for local bands through CJSW.
So digital is best. Same deal. It's we will get CDs, but I have a CD player on my computer, and that's about it. I don't have a CD player at home. I don't have a car, so I don't really get an opportunity to listen to the album. So to get a song through email or sent as a Wave or Dropbox file are all usually the best bet for any of that, really. Even with the whether you're a local act or you are you're signed to a label or anything like that. Usually same deal. Getting an album is usually, I don't want to say it's pointless for a lot of people, but it's it comes in the mail and you're okay, so unless it's a record, like you're like, oh, I've been waiting to hear this, I've wanted to listen to this, there's really nowhere to put it. So you just it just becomes like a stack in everything else. Whereas if you get it digital, you can easily dub it into the system. You can easily put that into your iPod or whatever. iPod, jeez, I'm old. into your iPhone, and then as far as with a lot of like the stuff that gets put on air, a lot of it comes through like a service called DMDS, which some bands can. Like they put up their stuff there independently, but a lot of it's used through like a radio tracker or like a promoter or a label will put stuff through DMDS, and what that does is it sends out to every station that would be, say, if you're doing an alternative thing, it'd be on an alternative panel, or they have people who are part of whatever rock or top 40 or folk music or anything like that. So that's one of the big systems that we use just to kind of get a lot of the new music that's not necessarily someone reaching out to you directly or the labels reaching out to you directly. It just kind of sets up the system that just makes it so much easier. And you can set up like a bio and like your tour listing and all that kind of stuff as well. But digital is usually the way to go for everybody to send their music.
I'll echo that. Digital is a great first step when you want to make connections with program directors or music directors in the commercial vein of radio, mainly just so they know who you are, so they're not just getting random CDs in the mail because, like Matt said, that's just going to end up in a stack somewhere and no one's going to touch it. But if you have a single that you want to start pushing towards commercial radio play, making that personal connection with a program or a music director is the best way to go with a digital format. And that can just to introduce yourself to them, ask for feedback, follow it up with a phone call. Then if they do want to hear the full album, or if they're not sure that this is maybe the single for you and they want to hear what else you have recorded, then you can start mailing out CDs. But it's about making that initial contact, and a link or an MP3 file or anything is usually the best way to start. We use DMDS as well to get the highest quality file on our airwaves. So if you want to set up a profile, it's a great little tool to, again, just be able to email it out to program directors or music directors. But really, it's about making that contact. It's about making sure that you're not just a face in a crowd and some other band emailing a program director. If you're coming to that city or if you are playing a local show, making those connections before you head out on the road is always really good, because then a program director is more inclined to play the song.
CKUA is kind of funny. We've got a librarian in Edmonton who sorts through, much like a music director would. She's just got a different job title. She sorts through all the new submissions, and so if you want to get your record in our emails that are station-wide about new releases and new things that are added into the library, into the quote-unquote playlist, although we don't really have anything like that. That's the best way to go. And I mean, that being said, I get direct emails from a lot of folks, and I mean, we've got programmers in Calgary and in Edmonton and contractors who work remotely from around the country. So I get a lot of emails digital. I get a lot of CDs mailed to me as well. And, I will explore all of them, although because I'm just an announcer producer, sorting through all of that isn't necessarily something that I can dedicate a whole lot of time to, but I will at least give it some consideration. So I would say if you're going to reach out to somebody directly, like a host of a show directly, just make sure you know sort of like the musical realm that they live in. I would love to hear your death metal band, but I'm probably not going to listen to it a whole lot because I'm just not going to play it on my show, unfortunately, because of the nature of the show that I play. So it's important to know who you're reaching out to, and the best use of your time too. The person that you're emailing is going to dedicate some time to that as well, but you have to be wary of your time and resources too. So if you're reaching out to a bunch of people and unaware that your particular style of music isn't going to resonate with them, then it's just not a super useful use of your time either. So it's good to be aware of that also. And of course, always keep in mind, especially when reaching out to specific hosts, you might not hear back. And that's not because they're jerks. It's just because it's life.
I have two things to add to that point. If you are reaching out to hosts specifically, please don't use social media. Don't slide into the DMs. That's all I ask. Like, use official channels. Again, with CJSW, it's going to be through the music department because we don't give out the personal information of our host. So that's one. And the other one is be patient, too. I think with any of our stations, CJSW gets about 300 submissions per week. And so as you can imagine, that takes a lot of time to sift through and listen to and put on our chart list, etc. So, don't slide into the DMs and be patient.
I just have one thing. You can slide into my DMs on Facebook and send music. I actually get a lot of music through people messaging me on Facebook, but it's a little bit different because it's like, it's not a personal volunteer going out and doing it. It's like, this is my one specific job to be doing that sort of thing. So you can send that all through email, but same deal. It's like, as long as it's a Dropbox link or anything like that. But that also ties into, like I said, like I'm friends with a lot of bands and stuff that just are like, hey, can you check out this song? So it's so much easier for me to just be on my desktop, open up Facebook, and check out that song.
I'm going to do what we call in radio a reset because lots of people have come in since we started, so I just want to reintroduce our panel. So it's Hayley Muir over on the far right from CKUA, Marta Ligocki on my near right from CJSW, Matt Berry from X92.9, and Melissa Dunphy from Corus Radio here in Calgary. And I'm Katherine Duncan from CBC here in Calgary. Do you have any, what not to do? I mean, you said, not DMs, but yes DMs, and Facebook Messenger is obviously a sore point with some of us. But any sort of pet peeves that you have about how people communicate with you. Any sort of what not to do's that you want to share?
Just kind of add on to what Hayley was saying about like where you're sending, like if you're sending music, like if you are a death metal band or you're it's like a hardcore rap or you're a straight up pop act and you're sending something to X or you're sending something to CKUA that like listen to the station or the show or whatever give it a half hour, not even. It's like within the first, like I'd say like usually within like 7 minutes, like you can tell like the kind of vibe at which it's going for, because then it saves the host time and it also saves you time by not just sending out these emails and being like, no one's getting back to me. It's because if someone sends you an email that says, hey, like can you feature whatever, like my death prog rock band, it's like, I don't even know what death prog rock is, but that's what you're sending off. So it's just kind of just kind of making sure you're aware of where you're sending the music. And if you're sending stuff into say maple syrup or exposure and it's a Canadian show, I mean obviously this doesn't affect you because you're all Canadian, but if they're just a strictly whatever local show or anything like that, just be aware of like what you're sending your stuff into.
My response to that and my general life advice is to just don't be a dick. That's fair. Yeah, so just, be kind and respectful, and the person that you're sending to wants to be able to help you, but they might not be able to, or they might be able to find somebody who can. So just be kind and nice and respectful of, other people's time and resources as well. Don't be a dick.
Kind of echoing both of those points. I think what Matt said about, really knowing what show and like what station. So like I said, CJSW, we have over 100 different programs. There's likely a show that's going to fit with your music. But when I get stuff, I had this really lovely guy who was like kind of pop accordionist send his music to my show and be like, this will be perfect for maple syrup. It's like, but I play experimental. This isn't the same. So that, and then, again, just really be patient right now. So our music director, his last day was Thursday, and we have 900 emails in the music at CJSW inbox. So it's a lot. And so to be patient and, again, respectful, you're welcome to send a follow-up email, but if you get aggro or rude, then we're going to be a lot less likely to want to help you.
Agreed. The research is a big thing, like Matt was saying. If you're gonna submit your music to a station, you got to find out what they play first, and it could be across Canada, it could be in your hometown, depending on what the goal is that you want to get out of your radio play. Is it for a tour, or is it just to start getting radio play in your hometown so you can book a tour? So I want to add the follow-up emails. It doesn't necessarily have to be, hey, did you get my email? Hey, did you get my voicemail? It can just be that constant updating that person on your career. You might not hear back from them originally if you just had a song, song, but then if it's 3 months down the road and you're inviting them to a show, they might be more inclined. Or if it's 6 months down the road and you have a full album now, they might be more inclined. So it's just about keeping people up to date on what you're doing. Again, that full kind of career view, so they know who you are as a musician and an artist.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice too. And it actually leads me into my favorite question, which is like, what's your favorite thing? What's the thing that gets you most excited about your job? Is it, discovering new artists or developing relationships, or, do you have a story of somebody who has done really well that you discovered? Anything like that?
Oh my God, am I first? No. Okay. That's okay. Does anyone?
I can go.
You go.
I've got a few. Discovering new music always. I haven't always been in a position where that was like a priority for me in terms of programming. I used to do like a pretty classic soul country show, and that's evolved in a big way. And it's a pleasure to get to listen to new music all of the time. I also get to hear, because at CKUA we're very much, hey, send me an email if you're listening. Like we put out our personal work information often, my work email. So I love hearing from somebody who's had a rough time that day, or a bad day at work, or something's happened and they heard something on the radio that I played that gave them a sense of peace or solace or happiness. And I mean, really, I think that's like what radio can do. I think that's what it's for, is to make people feel better and welcome and part of a community. So those are always the highlights of my day.
Yes, I totally agree. No, that connection with the audience is crazy. We have text-to-booth. We don't give out emails, but people can text into the radio station. And so the greatest compliment that I can get is someone being like, this music's really suiting the weather. It's like, yes. Totally. Or just like suiting someone's vibe. Or I have this one listener, God bless him, who is like, in the summer always listens to my show while he gardens and then sends me photos of like his beets. Like, that's amazing. So that connection with the listener is why I do radio. It's why I've been doing it for so long, and the fact that really like the core of my job is to train other people in how to do radio, and then for them to like have those experiences as well. It sparks a lot of joy for me. On the band side, I'll tell this story in terms of kind of success that I felt quite happy with. I did a panel kind of similar to this as part of Sled Island, and so we really and Hayley was on that panel too, actually, I think. We bestowed the wisdom of the campus mail-out as well as the live sessions, and this band like took crazy notes, took it to heart, and then literally in every stop that they did a live session at that campus station, and their album completely blew up, which was awesome. So Neck of the Woods, which is like a prog death band. So they did really well. Yeah. And so hitting up, seeing them pop up in like Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and just taking that knowledge and really applying it means a lot. I'm going to be doing mentorships tomorrow afternoon. So if you too want to learn all of that wisdom, please feel free to hit me up.
I think the new music discovery is obviously one of the favorite parts of radio. At least as far as like, because you're working at a commercial radio station, you have to have a little more mass appeal. So it's really cool when people are digging the music that you thought was like, oh, this is something that the listeners are really, really going to enjoy. So there's always something kind of fun about finding something that is, I guess, like being on a song before everyone else. Because it's one thing when it's like, any station can play like the hits and kind of, they're like, oh, it made top 15 on the charts, so we can play this now, and it's like it's safe. So I enjoy ACKNOWLEDGEMENT in particular because I find we take a lot of chances with a lot of the bands that we play, whether that be international or Canadian. And although everything still has to fit within like a realm of commercial radio, there's still a lot of opportunity to kind of break new music and kind of find something different. Like my biggest job I find is trying to find something. My boss is like a little bit older, so he's like kind of like on the you'll see it on the audio. He's aware. It's the first year where he's outside of that core demo. So my main goal is like trying to find something that is cool, that he's also like, oh, oh, this is cool. Okay, like I can see why the kids would like this. Is what he usually goes for. So it's the younger generation a little bit. And then as far as exposure, obviously it's just being able to play, playing local bands. It's having, like just people, like I love like people have sent like videos, especially like a lot of the like younger artists, like the first time their song has ever been on the radio, and they have these like Instagram videos or something of hearing it, and like their mom's listening with them. It's like it's really cute. Or I've had people where they're like, they reach out and ask about the songs otherwise, or someone had like a local band. They're no longer a band. They're called the Heirlooms, and someone messaged about like they're like, oh, what was that song? I was listening to it with my fiance, and we want to play it at our wedding. And so you're able to like send that off, and it's cool because otherwise these people may not have heard that. So it's cool having that just kind of, I guess, just intimate interaction with a lot of people.
The tastemaker stuff is a kind of an odd point you made, because I remember, you look at what other stations are playing across the Canada depending on your format, and you're like, okay, we're kind of in line with that. But then I remember one time we added that Flowbots song, that I can ride my bike with no handlebars, and we're like, this is a weird song. We're like, okay, here we go, and it just exploded. It's crazy to like get in touch with your listeners and the local community on what they like. So it's neat that way. But for me personally, I think it's the relationships. It's seeing that growth from an artist. It's listening to JJ Shiplet playing songs in a stairwell, and now, and then 6 months ago we were popping champagne for his first radio single in the studio. So it's seeing that progression of artists is really cool. It's, them stumbling over their guitar pedals at a live show to now they're playing the B stage at our festival kind of thing. So that growth and that kind of people who follow them along, it's really cool to see, and really, heartwarming when you have a listener that's like, I want to play it at my wedding, to I remember when they played this little club in town, to now they're playing at the Saddle Dome opening for this band who I also love. And it's just that growth and that progression is really cute.
I agree. Same thing. So I wonder if any of you have questions that you want to throw our way. I don't know if I want to run the microphone.
All right. I had a question about if you could give us an example of a band that you recently discovered, got excited about, brought to a music meeting, and then ended up on air, and just kind of like maybe a quick description of that life cycle, and then that band, so I can go check them out and listen to them.
Yeah, CKUA started doing this new thing in the last little while that's called the House Blend playlist, which is like maybe the closest thing to a quote-unquote chart list that we have. And it's all programmer submissions, a new song, ideally, that we're really into. And I stumbled upon this band from Victoria, and their whole, how do I say this? I wasn't super into their entire record. There were some songs on there that didn't really resonate with me, but there was one in particular that I really liked. It had this cool, kind of dusty doo-wop thing that just hits all my heartstrings. And so I popped it onto the House Blend playlist, and some other programmers were playing it. And but there was one day I played it, and Carrie Clark, who's a programmer at CJSW, CKUA, also Folk Festival, she sent me a text that just said, "Really cool song, Hayley." And I was like, fuck yeah. Cool. That was Carmana. They're this, they call themselves West Coast Soul. I think, yeah, they were, last week. There was a couple of tracks that CBC picked up, I think. But, yeah, the one that I picked was Send It To Me, I think. Just, doo-woppy and fun. And, yeah, just a funny thing that, after all these years, getting a text message from Carrie Clark is still I did it.
Absolutely. Another question. Who you are, Priscilla.
I'm Marcus, and I was just wondering, I know you said that you need 4 songs, but is that what everyone looks for, a full album or EP, or do you prefer a single, or what type of?
Yeah, not necessarily. I don't know what the exact rules of CKUA's librarian or ads are, but she adds a lot of singles and sends them out, as opposed to, especially now, because especially like bigger artists, when you've got a record coming out, it seems to be the trend now to just like, here's a single, here's a single, here's a single, here's a single almost every week until the record drops. So something like, say, Jenny Lewis drops a single, CKUA will put that in their new music ads. So I don't think that we have like a strict rule on things. For more regional, local acts, province-wide, I'd say the more the better. But I mean, I get emails, we get ads for like a 3-song EP or whatever. So I think our rules are a little looser.
The reason that we don't accept singles is we would literally be crushed with submissions. When I was saying about the 900 email inbox, like a good chunk of that is single releases, and so that's why. It's not that we hate singles. It's just it's honestly volume-wise would be completely unmanageable if we accepted singles. Yeah. Oh, sorry, man.
That's okay. In commercial radio, yeah, it's a world of singles. A lot of bands will live and die by that hit single that hopefully will take off on radio or not. And there's a lot of people that will argue about how the song that we're playing on the radio isn't as good as everything else on the record, and that's what the record's for, is for you guys to go and just kind of discover something else. But it's kind of unrelated, I guess. But it was an interesting quote, actually, that Garth Brooks had just said at Country Music Awards, and he was saying that the singles are the songs that are kind of safe and they're kind of fun for everybody, but the songs in the album are the ones that save someone's life. They're the ones that people will kind of gravitate towards after that. But what's cool is having that single so that people are like, oh, I can check out so and so. Kind of in relation to Mark's question, there was an artist named 2 Feet, and he came out with a single that he literally released on SoundCloud. He released it at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's in New York, and he went to bed, and he woke up the next day and had 8 million streams on SoundCloud, and it just kept blowing up. And he was one of these artists that he couldn't, I don't know. I don't want to say he couldn't deal with the fame. I guess that's what he said. He tried to commit suicide. He lived, and now he's on tour with Panic at the Disco, playing Madison Square Garden and playing all these
amazing shows. He's one of these guys that. You had this big single, and you listen to everything else that he has, and it's cool, and it's really awesome.
Yeah, I wouldn't limit yourself to a single. The word single gets thrown around a lot. A friend's band, they're releasing their album next week, and this week they were this is our single. The week before, this was our single. It was a preview. But when you're building those relationships with music directors or program directors, record what you want, record what you can. If you have the resources to do so, don't limit yourself to, okay, this is going to be our hit. This is going to be the one that takes off, because when you're building those relationships, if you have more for people to listen to, those other tracks on an album might resonate with someone at CJSW different than someone at CKUA, depending on the show. Don't limit yourself. If you have the means to record it. If you want to redo that song, getting more out there is going to give you more options.
I actually have a question to ask Matt. Is that okay? Yeah. Can you wear your music director hat for a second and just explain the degree to which the music that you're playing is decided by programmers, or is decided by the Toronto mothership, or decided by you? What's that breakdown?
So X is a little bit different. There's a lot of stations out there that you hear about. I don't work in a there's some of the bigger companies such as Corus or Bell or Rogers, and even in the States they're notorious for it. Where it's you have Entercom Radio, which is 300 stations. That are all whatever. They have alternatives. They have someone who's deciding stuff from the bottom down. And like I was saying earlier, there's some of these stations that will run based on a chart base. So they don't break new music. They only run on the top 15 or the top 10 type songs, and that's kind of it. And so at X, what we do is it's decided on. Ultimately, my boss Christian Hall, he's the program director. He makes the final call on if he absolutely hates something. But the rest of us are all on board. He kind of asks, you still have to buy into the majority. But there's 7 of us now in the music meeting. So it's both X89 in Calgary and X Red Deer. And so we listen to I'm kind of the filter, so I'm the main filter of what I guess gets brought into the meetings in general. So I try to find stuff, like I said, like that either people think are cool or things that are being, kind of trending. Like, sometimes there's stuff like a lot of songs get released in the U.S. a lot of time before they come into Canada, or there'll be bands that have sent me stuff that I think like, oh, that's really cool, or particularly, I guess, like a label or a radio tracker are usually more in line of what we end up listening to, because we've just built relationships with a lot of these people that do know kind of the brand in which they're pitching with X. And so how we decide the songs ultimately is like we listen to, it can be anywhere from, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 new songs that week to, 8. Like, try not to overload it, because ultimately it's like we may not add any of those, or we may add 2 or 3. So we kind of take a listen to all of those in like a boardroom. We all listen to the songs and just kind of decide what we all kind of vibed on. Sometimes it's majority rule. Sometimes things are decided on. Something sounds cool. If it's a little bit different, we'll play some stuff that like is based on an idea of like, it's like, I don't know, it's cool. We're playing Pop right now as like a feature, which Pop is like kind of like a punkier band, and it's like it's kind of a cool act to play, but will that necessarily go into full rotation? I don't know, but it's kind of fun to just be like, here's the feature category. That's what it's there for. So ultimately, we decide in house what's going to be added and what's going to be dropped, and we're pretty big on trying to be first on a lot of things. The downside with that is that sometimes if we find something that like we think is cool and it doesn't resonate as well as we would like to think with listeners, and then it gets dropped, and then labels get upset because they're like, why would you drop this song already? Like, it's just picking up. We're like, well, no one here liked it, so I don't know what to tell you. So those sorts of things.
So are you, sorry, I don't know if I need mic. So then are you like, okay, like this pop song is going to play at 12:50 on a Tuesday afternoon. Like how, like, is that the degree to which you're controlling the playlist?
Yeah. So the playlist on my end is, so my job is to run, like we, okay. So we're getting to, no. It's no, I'm a nerd for it, so I was just like, all right. I'm trying to think of where to start. So a lot of the station is built on clocks, and this is every commercial radio station for the most part that are run on like the idea where it's like, okay, so these certain songs, like, we call them A's or heavies. So it's like the biggest, popular, newest songs. And Top 40 works a lot in the same way. So we play like a lot of those bigger songs. They play at a certain point in the radio station, and so that's when people are like, I've heard this song 8 times today. It's like, well, you didn't actually. You may just think you heard it that many times, but it's all kind of just categorized in a certain way so that we maximize where the new music is playing, maximize where the gold-based stuff is, and then where features and stuff are. So we have some features that are scheduled in certain points during the day that you can check out, and then we have them online and all that kind of stuff. But everything is based on me programming through and just making sure everything kind of sounds good.
Can I add to that from a big corporate standpoint? Like Matt was saying, like the big evil corporations. We're. I did not use no. Evil. I'm saying it. It's true. There's a lot of kind of Toronto mass hub things that happen in commercial radio, especially like if you think of how many top 40 stations exist in Calgary. Like there's like 6 or something crazy like that. So it is kind of true that there is these mega points that will decide things. We actually, with our country format, we actually program the music for Edmonton and London, Ontario. So doing that research is important. I'm going to keep going back to that because if you find that the music director, if you're playing a show in London, Ontario, is actually based out of Calgary, that's one point you got to look into. Like X is very fortunate, and we're very fortunate in Calgary in general to have a lot of music directors in-house, but that's a big corporate thing, a big commercial thing that happens is music is usually based out of other places, or clocks are just plugged in like a machine.
Yeah, or they have, there are a lot of places will have almost like a VP of programming, and they're the ones who decide what song gets played. So there could be a song that's big in Toronto, so they're like, yep, we're going to play that in Calgary. And it's like, well, why would you play that in Calgary, though? No one knows who this artist is, and they just kind of go with it.
Well, we do have central people because so much of what we are collecting now are live streams that people can listen to, and so the streams are very genre-based. So for the shows, we have programmers and producers who are choosing songs for the shows. But we do have like a music director and they have music story meetings and decide what things to add. And they either get added to, so the shows like Drive, in the afternoons, the morning show. Regional shows like Key of A, we have a lot of freedom and flexibility, and I can play whatever I want, which is fantastic. Yes. So, yeah. So that's the nice thing about shows like the Key of A is that I'm completely independent, which is fantastic. But in terms of getting on the network, yes, there's a filtering system, people in Vancouver and Toronto who are listening and always listening to new stuff. And I send them stuff too. I mean, that's one nice role that I have is when I've got something from Key of A that I think deserves and would be ready to be played, in context in those bigger shows across the country, then I send them and they're grateful. The programmers are really grateful to get them. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going from the focal point of like with the music for the station as far as like how the programming stuff is decided, whereas exposure is that's just a singular. It's just me getting to do it, which is really cool. And in the last 6 years or whatever that I've been doing the show, I haven't had my boss say what was that? What are you playing? So there's never been any sort of higher management kind of thing put into that. It's always just been as long as it's kind of in the alternative, the alternative umbrella. Then usually pretty cool with it.
Was that interesting? Sorry, we kind of belabored the point, but was that useful for everyone? Cool. Okay, thank you.
So obviously we could keep going with this, but there's another panel scheduled to start like in 1 minute. So maybe a last word from each of you, or maybe you've already said your last word, in which case you can say whatever. But and some of us are going to be at the mentoring session. So anyway, whatever you'd like to say to wrap up.
Yeah, if you're a local band, CJSW is kind of ground zero in terms of radio, and that's what we're here for local bands, is to be a resource, to be a coaching ground, to be your cheerleader. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And like I said, I'll be around mentoring tomorrow and just kind of around the festival in general. So please don't be shy to come say hi. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
So with exposure, if you are a local act that kind of does like alternative or singer-songwriter kind of stuff, then you can send your stuff in, matt@x929.ca. I have business cards with me as well if you want to check that out. As far as as the commercial radio thing goes, obviously it is important. I believe in the value of radio, and obviously radio is hugely important as far as making hits. But I believe that, just getting your song out there, radio isn't the end-all be-all, or at least commercial radio isn't the end-all be-all. And so one of the things to always look at when you are submitting music is just because, either we're not playing you in a regular rotation on X, or you're not being played in Vancouver or Toronto or Edmonton or anything like that. On commercial radio, there is campus radio that is there to support acts like you, and not only in Canada, but in the U.S. as well. In the U.S., college radio is huge. It's its own format. There's charts much like there are here, and there are people that are listening to the music and playing those bands and putting that all out there. So it's important to look at that as well, to put all that music out there. And there's a lot of bands who have been discovered strictly through campus radio in North America. So it's something to always look into.
I would say just don't be afraid of, I'm just not going to get signed to a label. There are people across Canada that do the parts of a job that a label would do for an artist. There are radio trackers. There are people that can help you with distro. There are people that can answer your questions about how to get played on campus community stations across Canada. So being on a label isn't your only door into commercial radio if that's where you want to end up. Just do the research, make relationships, make sure your SOCAN stuff is up to date, because when you think about it, when they monitor a commercial station like us, we're going to be playing Blake Shelton 4 times an hour, let's say, but when they monitor a campus community radio station, you're going from a hip-hop show to an alternative show to a German show. So making sure that your SOCAN stuff is up to date is very important, so you get the most bang for your buck in those monitor times.
long live radio. It's the greatest thing. And radio offers so much more than just the opportunity for your music to get played on the station and have someone listen to it. It is an ever-evolving, living, breathing community through the airwaves. It's incredibly important to me, and I know it's incredibly important to a lot of people. And having those connections, especially with the sort of access points, the entry points, not below, but other than commercial radio, people can really be your champion if you get to know them. And if you're also working hard and being authentic and true to yourself and understanding who you're talking to, you can really get championed. And the people who are involved in radio can help. And especially in Calgary and Alberta right now, it's a great time for music. It's a great time for radio. And because of my bias, support independent community campus radio. Throw a couple of bucks their way when you can, because, I mean, the music scene in Calgary wouldn't be what it is without places like CJSW, and that spreads outward toward a lot of different kinds of communities.
That was fantastic. Thank you, guys. What a great panel. Thank you very much.